Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. I'm sure you noticed that we are not in one of our usual video locations. This is my garage. As you can see, not very exciting. It's a typical garage. Pretty cold and drafty in here. Actually today, we are in the middle of our first major snowstorm of the year. Honestly, probably this is the most snow that we've gotten here in my part of Connecticut in 2 or 3 years at least. We've had pretty, I don't want to say mild as far as temperature, but mild as far as snowfall when it comes to winters the past couple years. But we're supposed to get, I think, between 8 and 9 inches of snow here at my house, which, is significant. So I figured with all the snow outside, it's a perfect day to, of course, think about spring, think about the garden. Today we're going to do an experiment that I've been wanting to do for a little while, and that is winter sowing. I actually did do a little bit of winter sowing last year, but this year I'm hoping to experiment a little more and be a little more extensive with the plants that we winter sow. Now, the idea of winter sowing, probably the most common method to winter sow your plants is to grow them in a jug like this. So you want something that light can penetrate through. You can see it's not completely clear, but it is translucent, because this is going to work almost like a mini greenhouse, and your seedlings are going to need sunlight to be able to get through in order to grow. But the main idea behind winter sowing, as I said, this is something that I'm new to. I dabbled in a little bit last year, but I'm by no means a winter sowing expert. I just wanted to try it, and I decided to take you guys along for the ride. I thought you might enjoy experimenting with me. So the idea behind winter sowing is that rather than taking up space in your house to start your plants, you're going to start them outside in these little mini greenhouses. They'll be protected from the elements. This obviously will not protect against freezing temperatures. It will still get really cold in there. But the idea is that for certain seeds, going through that freeze-thaw cycle, as well as being protected from heavy snow and rain and potentially being washed away, which is the protection that the milk jug or the water jug provides, that can help your seedlings to get a little bit of an earlier start than they would if they were direct sown in the ground. It can also help them to get a little bit of a stronger start than if they were started inside. And of course, it has the wonderful benefit of freeing up a lot of space inside your house and also being a little bit easier. So you can see there's a lot of reasons why I wanted to give this method a try. So first, here in my garage, I'm just going to walk you through what I do to prepare these jugs. We're going to fill them with some potting soil. Then we're going to head upstairs where it's going to be a little bit warmer, and I'm going to show you what seeds I'm planning to start in these jugs. So the first thing I'm going to do with these jugs here is remove all the caps. We want the caps to be off because this is going to allow some natural moisture to get into these jugs as they sit out there over the course of the winter. We want rain and whatever snow we get to be able to get in and water these for us. The next thing you're going to want to do is to cut this basically in half, but leave a small hinge. I'm going to use a knife because that's what I have on hand. There are most likely safer ways to do this than to use a steak knife like I'm doing, so I definitely encourage you to be safe. One thing that you can do, I know I said we're going to cut this in half, but actually the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put drainage holes in the bottom. Whenever you're growing a plant in a container, you want to make sure that the water has a way to drain out. Because if the water can't drain out, it's just going to pool up in there and it's going to fill all the pockets in your soil that would normally be filled with air. And that's going to potentially drown your seeds, rot your seedlings. It's not really something that we want to happen. So we're first going to put some drainage holes. Now, a couple other options, if you want to be a little safer than me and not use a knife, would be you could burn holes in these somehow. I know if you have a hot glue gun, you can just kind of burn a couple holes in here. You could also use a drill. That's honestly probably what I would do, except my husband's not home right now and he has his tools with him. So I don't have access to a drill at the moment, and just waiting for him to get home would just be too much. So I'm going to get started with the knife that I have. And then we are going to cut. You want to leave probably about 4 inches or so on the base, and we're just going to cut all the way around, but we're going to leave a little hinge so that we can open and close it. So I just like to, this is going to look a little violent, but I just like to poke a little hole and then kind of twist, because that's going to, rather than just having a little slit, that's going to allow the water to drain. So I like to do 4 drainage holes. Depending on the size of the holes, depending on your climate, you may need more or less, but I think 4 is really a good start. Now, to get started with cutting the hinge, I also use the knife. Once I get a hole started, then we're going to be a little more civilized and use the scissors just to cut along the rest of it. So I like to leave maybe an inch or two attached. You can see I didn't cut all the way through here. That's going to make sure that these pieces stay together. Once we fill this with soil and plant our seeds in it, we're going to tape this closed, and that's going to provide the best protection. But I want to make sure that our pieces stay together, so the hinge also makes it a little bit easier to work with. So I basically just want the jug to look just like this. I'm just going to go ahead and prep the rest of the jugs that I have here, and then we'll go fill these up with some nice potting soil. So in this bin here, I have the first batch of this season's potting soil. I did share in a video last year, which I can link in the video description if you're interested, how I make my own potting soil. Basically, the reason that I make my own potting soil is, well, there's a couple reasons. One is that to get a really high quality potting soil, when you need a lot of it, I go through a lot of it here, it can add up and be really expensive. I find that by making my own, I am able to save a little bit of money, and I'm also able to control exactly how I like it to be. I had trouble finding a potting soil that I really liked, that was affordable, so I started making my own. So that's what this is here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take these jugs here. So I'm just going to take these jugs here. I'm just going to fill up this bottom portion. I'm going to put them on this tray. We're going to bring them upstairs where it's nice and warm, and we'll get started sowing some seeds up there. So we'll start with these 3 jugs here. I've got these all prepped, so let's take these upstairs. Before we get started actually planting out our water jugs, I just wanted to show you what I have planned to plant. Now, I do already have a few jugs out on the deck, so I'll show you what I put in those. We've got here, this is a type of Swiss chard called perpetual spinach. Now, cool season vegetables are a great candidate for winter sowing. Swiss chard is fairly frost tolerant, so depending on your climate and how cold it gets in your winter, it doesn't always survive the winter, but it can survive winter in milder climates, and it can survive some frost. So because these are not going to germinate for a while, cold hardy vegetables are a great candidate for winter sowing. So that's what I have here is some Swiss chard. Next, along the same line, I have some blue curled Scotch kale. Kale is another vegetable that's great for winter sowing. It is really resistant to cold. Now I have a hollyhock. This is a jet black Niagara hollyhock. The reason that this is a good candidate for winter sowing is this is actually a biennial. What that means is that if you live in the appropriate zone, I'm here in zone 6, it can overwinter, it can survive the winter, it'll go dormant. But because it is strong enough to survive the winter, that's another good candidate for winter sowing. Perennials would fall into that category as well. So if you have some perennial flowers or vegetables that are perennial in your zone, then winter sowing can be a great option for starting those. Now we've got some winter choy. This is Chinese yellow heart winter choy. I got some tatsoi and some slow bowl arugula. The arugula is a little bit of an experiment because arugula can survive cold weather. I've never winter sown this before. When I direct sow arugula in my garden, I usually do plant it very early in spring as soon as the ground is unfrozen, as soon as the snow is gone and you can really work the soil. Arugula does great. The reason this is a little bit of an experiment is because arugula also does tend to bolt really easily. So I'm not sure how well this is going to do. Basically, when we say that a plant bolts, what we mean is that it stops focusing on producing leaves and it's decided that it's time to produce seeds. It'll send up a center stalk. It'll basically stop leaf production, and at that point the flavor of the greens usually changes a little bit, usually not in a positive way. So arugula, because it tends to have a short season, I'm not sure how well that'll do. That's a little bit of the experiment. And I also did winter sow some peppermint Swiss chard, which I threw out the packet because I sowed the entire packet, all that I had left. So I'm going to show you some other things that are on my list to winter sow, and we will see which ones we're able to get to today. Now these two are both a bit of an experiment. I have Lauren's grape poppy and mother of pearl poppy. Poppies are very cold tolerant. They do like to be sown early. A lot of people say that they aren't really big fans of being transplanted though, which is why this is a bit of an experiment. So definitely stick with me if you want to see how that works. I've got some limoncello lemon balm, Rosina calendula, and I'm dropping stuff. So I have some skullcap here. This is a perennial medicinal herb. This is another great candidate for winter sowing because it says to sow and garden in cool soils of fall or early spring, or give 30 days cold conditioning in the refrigerator. Plants that require a cold period before germinating are great options for winter sowing. So I'm thinking the skullcap should hopefully do really well sown that way. This is common yarrow. This is a perennial in my zone. Slotty land chamomile. This is an annual, but because it likes cool weather, this could be a good option. And then I've got a couple cabbages. I have grown lots of brassicas in my garden, but I do usually start them early inside. So I'm going to be experimenting by sowing some of those in my winter sown greenhouses. I'm also going to start some of these early in my house. So we can kind of, as the season goes on, do a side-by-side comparison and see what does better. So I've got early Jersey Wakefield cabbage, I've got Golden Acre cabbage, and Savoy Perfection cabbage. So we'll give those a try. Then I've got a couple other cold hardy greens here. I do not know how to pronounce this, so I will just show you. The packet looks like I know there's a little bit of a glare there. I've got a couple varieties of pak choy, and yep, 3 types of pak choy I have here. We won't get to all of these today. I don't think I even have enough milk jugs to do all of these today, but I'm just going to give you an idea of my plans for winter sowing. Dill is another one I'm going to be experimenting with. The reason that I think dill is likely to do well is because often in my garden, if I don't harvest all of the dill, it'll go to seed, and then new dill will just appear in my garden. Basically, it winter sowed itself. So because it does well in those kind of conditions, I'm guessing it'll do well winter sown in these jugs as well. So we're going to give it a try. Have another variety of Swiss chard here. Got some Mizuna Red Streaks mustard. It's another cold hardy green. And I've got 3 more varieties of kale that I want to try. I've got scarlet kale, Russian red kale, and dazzling blue kale. As I go through this list here, if there's anything that I'm mentioning that you have tried winter sowing before, I would love to hear how your results were. Now last year I did winter sow, as I said, in a much more limited scale. I found that the chamomile did really well winter sown. I found that Swiss chard did really well winter sown. Snapdragons did really well. I'm trying to remember. Can't remember what else I started. I know there were a couple things. I did try onions, which did not do well for me, so I'm not trying those this year. But if you have experience with any of these, or anything else that I'm not mentioning here that does really well for you winter sown, I'd love to hear that too. Now I have a couple cauliflowers and a couple broccolis I'm going to try winter sowing. And now later in the season, I think it's a little bit too early to winter sow warm season annuals, but I have here some sunflowers. I have alyssum. This is actually a cool season annual that got lumped in with my warm season annual somehow. I think alyssum will do really well. I've got some cosmos. Cosmos is a warmer season annual, so I'm probably going to wait until at least maybe March to winter sow these, and we'll see how they do. And I will definitely start backups of these inside my house. And actually, I've got an apple pie in my oven in honor of the first snow, so I'm going to go pull that out and I'll be right back. I think my apple pie actually needed another 5 minutes, so you might hear my timer go off again in a minute. But, so as I said, I've really got, oh, and then this one here, raspberry daiquiri agastache. This is a perennial in my area, so this is one that I'm hoping to winter sow as well. So if you have experience winter sowing, as I said, and you want to let me know any of these that worked well or didn't work well for you, or anything else that you recommend, I would love to hear that. So we have, I think, 9 milk jugs that are ready. So I'm going to choose what I'm actually going to start today. I'm going to put these Cosmos away because I know it's a little early to start those. So I think for our first 3 containers, I'm going to try Golden Acre cabbage. I'm going to plant the skullcap since that needs a cold period to germinate. I think this would be a good one to get started with, and also the scarlet kale. Now I have all these markers that I'm just reusing from last year. As you can see, they're a little bit dirty. This is a great opportunity to reuse some of those old markers. So I'm just going to prepare one of those for each of our plants that we're starting. So I'm going to start with the scarlet kale. You can see the little seeds here. I'm going to try to space them out just a few inches apart from each other. That way, when spring comes and it's time to transplant them, I should be able to separate them pretty easily without their roots being too tangled. Now, just like when you're sowing any other types of seeds, you're going to want to look at your seed packet for instructions. This says to sow about 1/4 inch deep, so that's what I'm doing here. So I think I'm going to try to plant these in a grid. I think I'll try to do 16 pretty evenly spaced, and that way I should be able to separate these from each other pretty easily. And then I'm just going to gently brush the soil back on top of these and return the extras back to the seed packet. So just like when you're starting any other seeds, it's really best to pre-moisten the soil. I probably should have mentioned that before I put the kale seeds in, but I don't really want to water these once the seeds are put in place because I don't want to dislodge them. So by pre-moistening the soil and then putting it outside into a cold environment where it might be gently rained on or filled with snow on a day like today, that will be gentle enough to not dislodge the seeds. So you want to moisten it. I haven't planted in this one yet, so I'm just going to show you. You want to moisten it enough that when you squeeze it, it's going to hold its shape, but you're not going to be able to squeeze any water out, or at least not any significant water out. So that's what we're going for here. So once I filled these, I did add some water into these to get the right moisture before adding any seeds. So I'm just going to add the tag right into the kale. Then what we're going to do is close this up. I want to use some duct tape to hold it closed. So basically you can see I have my hinge here. I'm just going to go right to the hinge. Add some duct tape. We're just going to go all the way around until this is fully enclosed. Now I did include the tag inside the jug here, but I want to have a label on the outside as well. So I do also have a tag inside this jug here, but I'd like to be able to just look at it quickly and know what it is. Most likely the Sharpie that I wrote on the outside of this jug will end up fading, especially once the sun gets a little stronger in the spring. But I like to have it on there at least as long as it lasts. So I'm just going to go ahead and plant our other jugs, and we'll get these out in the snow. So next I'm going to plant some of these skullcap seeds. You can see these are really tiny. The seed packet that I got here actually doesn't mention a certain depth to plant them. So I'm just going to surface sow these and just gently press them into the soil. These seeds are so tiny, I'm just going to sprinkle them as best I can. I think we'll use a couple more seeds than that. And then just press them in to make sure that they have contact with the soil, and stick a label in there too. And finally, the golden acre cabbage. I'll plant that exactly the same way I planted the kale. So our first 3 winter sown jugs are ready to go outside and join the ones that I did the other day. So I'll be sure to update you guys as the season goes on, how all those different plants are doing. And then hopefully by the end of the season, we'll have more of a good idea what plants do really well winter sown and what are really best to start other ways. So thank you so much for joining me and hanging out with me on this cold, snowy day. As I said, if you have done any winter sowing in the past, I would love to hear your experience, so please leave that in the comments. So I hope you come back again to see how our plants are doing. Hope you're having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.